Okay, the supply of water, the supply of food, the supply of God, tainted or poisoned, and warnings to the doubtful. And we'll start with these two right here. We'll pick it up. There was a famine during the time of Elijah. So during this time, God speaks to Elijah and says, "Get thee hence and turn thee eastward and hide thyself by the brook Cherith, that is before the Jordan. And it shall be that thou shalt drink of the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to feed thee there." So there it is. God has instructed him to go by the brook Cherith. That's where he'll drink, and he commands ravens to feed him there. So this is during a time of famine. And the ravens brought him bread and flesh in the morning, and bread and flesh in the evening, and he ate and drank from the brook. So there you have it, through the faith of obedience of a supernatural supply during drought and famine at Elijah's time. And so listen to this following video.
Well, I mean, that's just that. I mean, he fed Elijah, wasn't it? With a raven, an unclean bird, but he used that, and he fed him in a time of famine. And if he can do that, then he can do, anything just like that for us out here. But the thing about it is that requires faith.
Okay, so there you have a testimony from a homeless man I found wandering about in a field looking for the Lord to manifest a miracle for him on that day. Next, let's look at how the Lord provided water after Samson defeated the Philistines using a jawbone from a donkey. Samson found a jawbone of an ass and put forth his hand and took it, and he slew 1,000 men therewith. And Samson said, "With the jawbone of an ass, heaps upon heaps, and the jaw of an ass, have I slain 1,000 men." And he was sore athirst, and called on the Lord, and said, "Thou hast given me this great deliverance into the hand of thy servant, and now shall I die for thirst, and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised?" And God clave a hollow place that was in the jaw. There came water thereout. And when he had drunk, his spirit came again, and he revived. Next, let's look at the supply of God. And the word of the Lord came unto Elijah, saying, "Arise, get thee to Zarephath, and behold, I have commanded a widow woman there to sustain thee." So there you have, God commands a widow woman to provide for Elijah during a time of famine. The widow woman, now when Elijah arrives there, the widow woman was there gathering of sticks, and he called to her and said, "Fetch me, I pray thee, a little water in a vessel that I may drink." And as she was going to fetch it, he called to her and said, "Bring me, I pray thee, a morsel in thy hand." Now listen to the response of this woman. She said, "As the Lord thy God liveth, I have not a cake, but only a handful of meal in a barrel, and a little oil in a cruse. And behold, I'm gathering 2 sticks, that I may go in and dress it for me and my son, that we may eat it and die." So here this woman was on her last meal, and God commands her to give that last meal to Elijah to provide for the man of God. Now it goes on, "And she went and did according to what the saying of Elijah, and he and her house did eat many days, and the barrel of that meal was not wasted, neither did the cruse of oil fail, according to the word of the Lord, which he spake by Elijah." Now let's take one more example of God's supply, God's supernatural supply. "And there came a man from Baal Shalisha, and he brought the man of God bread of the first fruits, 20 loaves of barley, and full ears of corn in the husks thereof. And Elisha said, Give unto the people that they may eat. And his servitor said, What should I set before 100 men? Elisha said again, Give the people that they may eat, for thus saith the Lord, they shall eat and shall leave thereof. And so he set it before them, and they did eat left over according to the word of the Lord. Now this was so easy for God to do. Jesus demonstrated this before 5,000 men. There's nothing too difficult for the Lord. Next, we'll look at tainted or poisoned. And Elisha came to Gilgal, and there was dearth in the land, and the sons of the prophets were sitting before him. And he said unto his servants, Set on the great pot, and see the pottage for the sons of the prophets. And one went out into the field to gather herbs, and found a wild vine, and gathered thereof wild gourds, his lap full, and came and shred them into the pot of pottage, for they knew them not. So they poured out for the men to eat, and it came to pass, as they were eating of the pottage, they cried out and said, O thou man of God, there is death in the pot, and they could not eat thereof. But Elisha said, Bring meal. And he cast it into the pot, and he said, Pour out for the people, that they may eat. And there was no harm in the pot. The supernatural supply of God, whether it's tainted or poisoned. Next, let's take a look at warnings to the doubtful. Now, some of you may remember the session on the famine of the curse that was done. In that section, I talked about a cursed famine in Samaria under the siege of Ben-Hadad. Now, I want to talk today about how that famine concluded as a warning from the Lord. So let's take a look at that. Then Elisha said, Hear ye the word of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord, Tomorrow about this time shall a measure of fine flour be sold for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel, in the gate of Samaria. Then the Lord, on whose hand the king leaned, answered the man of God, and said, Behold, if the Lord would make windows in heaven, might this thing be? And he said, Behold, thou shalt see it with thine eyes, but thou shalt not eat thereof. Now, the story goes on. The army that was laying siege, the Syrians, were out in the field, and this is what the Lord did. The Lord made a host of the Syrians to hear a noise of the chariots, and the noise of horses, even the noise of a great host, and they arose and fled in the twilight, and left their tent. And then the story goes on to say these lepers came to the camp, and they said that we may go and tell the king's household. So they came and called unto the porter of the city, and they told them, and they told it to the king's house within. Now, it goes on to say that the king appointed the Lord, on whose hand he leaned, to have charge of the gate, for the people were going in and out in a riot. And this is what happened. And the people trode upon him in the gate, and he died, as the man of God said. So there you have the fate of someone who doubted the word of the Lord. Now, I want to close with these words in the book of Hebrew. This has to do with those that came out of Egypt. Here's what it says. Your fathers tempted me, proved me, and saw my works for 40 years, whereas I was grieved with that generation. And then it goes on to say, Take heed, brethren, lest there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief. It goes on to say, They entered not his rest because of unbelief. You need faith to receive from God. You need faith to maintain what you receive from God. A life without faith is a life without God. And I'll close with these words from Jesus. Take no thought for your life, what ye shall eat, or what ye shall drink, nor yet for your body, what ye shall put on. Your heavenly Father knows that you need all of these things. And I'll close it with that.